Welcome to the Tiger's Den. This is the voice of Cheryl, and I am Toothless Tiger. I want to talk about an incident that took place in Texas back on July 29th, 1910. It's known as the Slocum Massacre in Texas. I'd never heard of it. It wasn't until I did the Juneteenth video that one of my subscribers, thank you, Riding Dirty, shared that he grew up not too far away from the Slocum Massacre. I didn't know what he was referencing, so I did some research. And I found an article that I thought would be interesting to share. This channel is about knowing who we are and walking in who we are. I always wanted to know after, 9 years ago, who were we before we were slaves? I never had that question before then. And I went on a journey, and this journey has taken me in many places. When we hear his story, it is truly his story, because we didn't get the whole story. We know we didn't get it in school, and if you don't have, living parents that grew up in the area, then you probably wouldn't know it now. Out of all of my studies, I never ran across it, so I thought it would be interesting to share. These are some of the articles and the stories that the new critical race theory that they speak of will want to not teach our children. I think that we need to know where we come from so that we won't keep repeating the cycle. And certainly so that we won't return in bondage in the manner in which we were in bondage. I believe our hands are still tied, but I truly also believe if we learn what is written in the Library of Congress, in different books, in dictionaries, your Oxfords, your Websters, your etymology dictionaries, I believe that we can change our lives, not by might, but by principle. The 5 principles that are laid before us: love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. That's what I'm striving for all of humanity. But for my people, the organic people of the land, I certainly would like to get you in a mood where you would start searching for yourself and then having the conversations with your children. Maybe they won't be so afraid of what's going on in the communities now. Once they understand, and overstand that this is nothing new. The mass shootings, they've taken place before. It's just a different target. So I want to share this article, July 29th, 1910, Slocum Massacre in Texas. The time period, World War I, 1910 through 1919. Themes, African American, democracy and citizenship, racism and racial identity. Written by E.R. Bills. Slocum Massacre Genocide in East Texas. The 1910 Slocum Massacre in East Texas officially saw between 8 and 22 African Americans killed. And evidence suggests casualties were 10 times these amounts. Yet the massacre has become a dirty Lone Star secret. remarkable more for the inattention it has received than for its remembrance. Unlike most Texas communities in the early 20th century, the unincorporated town of Slocum, like Rosewood, Florida, was largely African American, with several black citizens considerably propertied and a few owning stores and other businesses. This alone, in parts of the South, might have been enough to foment violence. But in the area around Slocum, roughly 100 miles east of Waco, there were other issues, according to newspaper reports and other, sometimes conflicting accounts of the massacre. When a white man reportedly tried to collect a disputed debt from a well regarded black citizen, a confrontation occurred. Hard feelings lingered. When a regional road construction foreman put an African American in charge of rounding up help for local road improvements, a prominent white citizen named Jim Spurger was infuriated and became an agitator. The Slocum violence was reported in various degrees of truth in newspapers across the country at this time. Rumors spread warning of threats against Anglo citizens and plans for race riots. White malcontents manipulated the local Anglo population, and on July 29th, white hysteria transmogrified into bloodshed. Stoked and goaded by Spurger and others, a collection of white mobs made up of Slocum locals and heavily armed white residents from all over Anderson County roamed through the area in groups of 6 or 7 or in mobs of 30 to 40, and according to some reports, up to 200. Members of the mobs engaged in what authorities later termed a potshot occasion, firing on black citizens at will. They moved from road to road and cabin to cabin, shooting down African Americans in their tracks. Survivors of the bloodshed spread the word, and African Americans began fleeing. The white mobs followed blacks into the surrounding forests and marshes and shot many victims in the back as they fled. Several bodies were discovered with bundles of clothing and personal effects at their sides. This kind of sounds like a drive-by shooting without the vehicle. Every initial newspaper report on the transpiring bloodshed portrayed the African American as armed instigators. But these accounts were heinous mischaracterizations. Anderson County Sheriff William H. Black of Palestine, Texas, and Special Deputy Godfrey Reese Fowler arrived in the Slocum area, and they discovered a terrified white populace, most of whom had slept overnight in churches and schoolhouses. But it was increasingly apparent that the alleged African American mob that had supposedly conspired to attack the local white community hadn't materialized. When reporters gathered on July 31st, up to 24 murders had been reported, but local authorities had only 8 bodies. Sheriff Black said it would be difficult to find out just how many were killed because they were scattered all over the woods, and buzzards would find many of the victims first. Men were going about killing Negroes as fast as they could find them, Sheriff Black told the New York Times. These Negroes have done no wrong that I can discover. Black continued, I don't know how many were in the mob, but there may have been 200 or 300. They hunted the Negroes down like sheep. The truth is, a harrowing number of African Americans were slaughtered in the counties of Anderson and Houston in the midsummer of 1910. Yet today, it's almost never spoken of, much less widely acknowledged. Sufficiently researched or historically considered, including its omission in a Centennial History of Anderson County, Texas, 1936, and History of Houston County, Texas, 1687 through 1979. Context and national response. In every month for the 6 months leading up to the Slocum Massacre, an African American in the East Texas region was executed by a white mob based on allegations alone. No trials, no juries. Simply white verdicts. After the lynching of Allen Brooks, just 4 months prior to the Slocum Massacre, a photograph of his hanging body and a crowd of 100 spectators was made into a postcard that was mailed to friends and family. And these injustices weren't exceptions to the rule. Rather, they were the rule under which African Americans lived and died in that part of the world. That part meaning Texas. J. Milton Waldron, J. Anderson Taylor, and W. J. Howard signed the letter on behalf of 150 ministers asking President Taft for help. On August 13, 1910, a group of more than 150 African American ministers from Washington, D.C., sent a letter to President Taft regarding the Slocum Massacre. In the letter, the committee implored President Taft to use the powers of his great office to suppress lynching, murder, and other forms of lawlessness, and to do something to make human life more valuable and law more universally respected. The Attorney General responded on August 24th with a succinct letter stating, "The protection of life and property is generally a duty devolving up the state authorities," and continued, "Your letter and petition deal with the subject of the treatment of colored persons generally, and therefore furnish no facts which would warrant this department in taking any steps to redress the wrongs complained of." Trial aftermath. At the initial grand jury hearing of the suspects charged in the Slocum atrocity, nearly every remaining resident was subpoenaed. Some refused to testify and were arrested. By the time the grand jury findings were reported on August 17th, several hundred witnesses had been examined. Though 11 men were initially arrested, 7 were indicted. The grand jury judge moved the trial to Harris County, distrusting the potential jury of peers the defendants might receive in Anderson County. The indictments received no interest or justice in Harris County. Eventually, all those charged were released, and none of the indictments were ever prosecuted. In the meanwhile, the personal holdings of many Slocum area Anglo citizens fortuitously increased. The abandoned African American properties were absorbed or repurposed as the now majority white population saw it. The standard Southern Anglo-centric world order was restored. The community reflects effects of the event to this day. While most nearby towns have African American population of 20% or more, Slocum's is just under 7%. There was a recent acknowledgement. After decades of effort, a marker commemorating the Slocum Massacre was dedicated on January 16, 2016. On March 30, 2011, after a two-part February feature on the Slocum Massacre by Tim Madigan in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the 82nd Texas legislature adopted House of Representatives Resolution 865, acknowledging the incident. On January 16, 2016, a historical marker to the Slocum Massacre was unveiled in a Washington Post article. Constance Holly Jarwitt, who is a descendant of victims of the massacre and who applied for the historical marker, said, "This most definitely helps restore the Slocum Massacre. It is proper place." Holly Jarwitt continued, "It was being ignored, and by ignoring it, you're spitting in the face of those who died during the tragic event. You're basically saying either it didn't happen or it was not important, and it is very, very important." Despite local opposition to the marker, Chris Florence, spokesperson for the Texas Historical Society, told the Washington Post, "There is difficult history in the state, and this shows there has been a lot of change." Longtime State Judge Bascom Bentley also noted, "I'm glad the marker is there. It's part of our history, an ugly part. But the purpose of history is to teach us how to do better in the present and future." The atrocities committed in the Slocum area in 1910 should give us all pause and spur commitments to definitively establish the truth, fully acknowledge it, and honestly and constructively address it. E.R. Beals is the author of the 1910 Slocum Massacre, an act of genocide in East Texas. Beals received a degree in journalism from Southwest Texas State University in 1990. Reprinted here with permission of the author, versions of this story have been published on Dissident Voice, The Statesman, and the Patrick Murphy blog. Our thanks to Constance Holly Jarwitt, formerly Constance Holly Ramirez, a descendant of victims of the 1910 Slocum Massacre, for sharing this story with the Zen Education Project. Holly Jarwitt was a Dallas Independent School District principal for many years. So again, if we don't know history and we don't teach history, then history is bound to repeat itself. Thank you for entering the Tiger's Den. I am about to leave the Tiger's Den.
This video was made for education and entertainment purposes only. There's no malice or ill intent from the content creator. So please like, share, and subscribe, and have a great evening. Good night.